Hey, everybody, this is Mark Levine, and you are listening to the NYC Real Estate Podcast. Today, we've got a great guest, great attorney that I've dealt with. But before we introduce you, Jeff, I'll give you a little bit of a name drop there before we do. I just want to remind everybody that you could email the show at nycpodcast@gmail.com. Again, that's nycrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. And we are consistently doing episodes, even while we're all working remote, and we're doing this through Zoom, and we'll throw this up onto our YouTube channel as well, which the link will be in the description of the audio. Again, I'm Mark Levine. I am from New York City property management firm, EBMG, and let's get talking. So Jeff Schwartz, welcome.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you having me.
So you are with Schwartz, Sladkus, Reich, Greenberg, Atlas, LLP.
I am.
That's
yes.
a mouthful. So tell me, before we get into our topics, and we wanted to cover a lot of COVID items, as we've all been talking about, do you want to give us a quick rundown on your experience and, how you got into real estate law, and, just give us a background for everybody that doesn't know you?
Sure, I'd be happy to. So I've been practicing real estate law since 1986. I can't believe how long it's been already.
Wow.
This is certainly a unique time, unique situation. Can't say I've ever had it before. I don't think any of us ever have. But my focus really has been on the co-op condo world since 1989. And about 5 years ago, my partners and I started our own firm, and with a heavy emphasis on the co-op and condo work. We've really seen, all aspects of that area, know it very well, have a good group of people who are practicing and who have a tremendous amount of experience. While at the same time, we still do a lot of other types of real estate transactional work. But certainly in the last 3 months, as we practice from wherever we may be, in whatever state we may be in, unshaven a little bit, probably needing a haircut, but
we need hair and makeup.
Yeah, but have definitely been encountered with things that we never thought we would, and certainly doing all we can to try to give our co-op and condo clients the best legal and practical advice.
Yeah.
And try to get things out there and stay ahead of things as they develop, whether it be through the different orders by Governor Cuomo, whether it be CDC advice, OSHA things, and certainly there are a number of topics that are at the forefront in the co-op condo world. And, as we discussed, let's talk about a few.
Yeah, and we're in this bubble of real estate, in the city, and the city, the state, the federal, they're all opening up at different times, and there's different programs. One thing that we came across really early on in this was the payroll protection program. There was a lot of questions on, would co-op and condo buildings be eligible for the program? I know as a small business, that's something, as a management company or as an attorney, a legal firm, you have options that are maybe not available to the co-op and condo world. So do you want to walk us through what you're seeing with the payroll protection program?
Yeah, sure. The PPP program, when it came out, it emphasized, or the handouts emphasized, that it was obviously being run through SBA, that it was going to be quite permissive and try to include as many small businesses as possible. But when co-ops and condos started asking whether or not they were eligible, the SBA guidelines, when examined, had specific exclusions for co-ops and condos. So although the program was first rolled out with this whole permissive type of inclusionary language, the guidelines clearly had specific language that did not make co-ops and condos eligible. So of course, many questions started to roll in. And what we started seeing, of course, is some co-ops and condos applying with an addendum to their application where they specified that it was unclear whether they were eligible, so they were putting in the application anyway. Some co-ops and condos felt it wasn't appropriate for them to apply, so they didn't, for whether it be that there wasn't real economic uncertainty, which is a certification that had to be made, or that specifically they weren't eligible. So many did not apply.
What if a building, now I know in Miami there was, I think it was on Star Island, which is a private island that the HOA there voted, I think they were eligible for like $1.2 million in PPP, and they actually voted it down because they thought, that money could go, maybe be better served elsewhere. It's probably one of the highest concentration of wealth, in the South and, in Florida. But for those buildings that, let's say a co-op did apply for it, it was unclear at the time because it was the logjam, in the very first few days. It was just get in the application because we don't know if we're going to be eligible. And then things kind of jammed up there a little bit, and there was maybe a little bit more clarity. But in the sense of a building that applied for it as a co-op and then got financing, what would you recommend in a legal sense from them, now that we know there's a carve out for co-op and condo not being eligible for it? Is it an issue that maybe that could come back to bite them if they
I think anyone who did, any co-ops and condos that did apply and were given the loan, their downside, I believe, would be just having to pay the loan back.
Right.
I think that all the applications by co-ops and condos that were submitted, notwithstanding the specific language, were made in good faith. And as a matter of fact, the SBA came out with a guideline about a week and a half ago stating that the certification would be deemed to be made in good faith for all loans under $2 million, and that they wouldn't be auditing them. I think there's a little bit of a disconnect between the certification as to economic uncertainty and the certification as to eligibility. But I certainly think that the officers of co-ops and condos who made the certification and submitted it were clearly doing it in good faith and not in for any devious or means to get something that they were not entitled to. And I do think that downside is paying back the loan. Certainly, I can't even envision a possibility of, fines or imprisonment. I think that's way out there. I also know, and, I have been involved in discussions and I've heard actually in a podcast, not a podcast, I don't even know what to call these things these days, but in a informational session that I listened in on with Chuck Schumer, who did tell us a lot about what's going on right now and his efforts to pass some new legislation that would specifically cover co-ops and condos. And that is certainly out there on the table right now and being considered. And he's very bullish that it will get through. So hopefully that new legislation will get through. He said that it will clearly cover co-ops and not condos, but there would be another program that would cover what he called homeowners that would include condominium owners. Right. So, there's some positive news that's on the horizon, and hopefully that we'll know about that fairly soon. I do think that, and this kind of dovetails into something that you and I were talking about, many co-ops and condos feel that perhaps it would be inappropriate for them to get the PPP loan because the money should be directed really at other or small businesses that are having difficulty really maintaining their employees because, of course, they've lost all their revenues.
Right.
My experience has been that the level of non-payments by owners in co-ops and condos has not been anywhere close to what some of our building owners are seeing, and certainly not in the commercial field. That the shareholders and unit owners in co-ops and condos respectively, for the most part, are paying their maintenance or paying their common charges
Yeah.
because, as opposed to renters who maybe aren't doing so.
Right.
Has that been your experience in the building?
Yeah, I've been watching the arrears reports especially on my co-ops, and we manage probably about, I don't know, 50 or 60 co-ops at this point, but nothing is extremely out of the ordinary for that. And this is kind of hitting the time right now where a lot of the buildings are doing assessments for the abatements. So it's kind of like a 1-2 punch. We put out the co-op abatements and the STAR and the veterans disability, and then at the same time they're running an assessment to counteract the out-of-pocket expense. And for those people that maybe don't have the benefit of the abatement, maybe they're a sponsor. I've even seen, this is actually a good point, I've seen buildings that have been very adverse to sponsors, just mentally, just going from the mental, they're the sponsor, they're maybe not so much the evil party, but not seeing it in the same way as just the shareholder that lives there. But they've actually been granting extensions for those assessments rather. So instead of a one-time shot, recognizing that maybe the renter in the sponsor's apartment is having financial difficulties, maybe the sponsor is having financial difficulties. So instead of paying this assessment up front in one shot, we're going to be nice and we're going to extend it over, the rest of the year so that there's maybe a little bit more breathing room. So I'm seeing that there's concessions being made from that level, and it's been very helpful in not only just the financial health. We don't want to get into a complete arrear situation, but it's been also helpful for the relationships between the buildings and the sponsors where there may have been that issue before.
Yeah, on the flip side of that, I'm just wondering, and just talking out loud, I don't know if you've seen this also, but I think, yes, when these real estate tax abatements come through and many of the boards enact assessments to equal those, or really so that no cash or no credit is really given to the shareholders. I think I had 2 calls on this where the boards in these times are perhaps saying, maybe this year we shouldn't do that, and maybe we should give everybody the credit if that's financially possible. It could be a good tool for buildings to, show that they're being sensitive to the economic times, and maybe this year they don't have to do the assessment. Just something really to consider.
Yeah, it is a budget buster.
Yeah.
When you look at it on a small building, you could very well have a $60,000 to $80,000 to $100,000 credit that you have to give out on the abatement. So you are kind of handcuffing the corporation if you don't do the assessment for it. But that's not to say that you maybe could just breeze by the first 3 months without assessing back and then look at it in September or October and say,
right, yeah, doing it partially.
Yeah.
I think in these times, certainly being sensitive to the issues goes a long way, and being insensitive to them is, not something that goes over well with the shareholders. Now, of course, people are using COVID for sometimes, excuses for things that really aren't the case. And that gets, I think, works against them too. But I think, being sensitive to it up front and giving a little bit of leeway is something that it can buy boards a lot of goodwill.
Yeah. And we're all in this boat together. The boards are people, they're shareholders, the unit owners, they're dealing with the same financial constrictions and constraints that everybody else is dealing with. So if they're feeling it, it's everybody. It's not
right. And dealing with all these new problems that they've never experienced, and certainly, don't have training for. Board members obviously work for free and are doing this even before COVID with very little recognition. Now to pile this all on, it's a lot.
Yeah. So going in that direction, things are changing. The way that we operate buildings are changing. In terms of building rules and restrictions that we've seen in the I want to say the marketplace, but it is kind of what it is. But no visitors, work is stopped, essential work is the only thing that's going on, and typically that's not really like painting your apartment. So we're not really letting deliveries in that are not emergency. We're not letting workers in that are not an emergency basis. And we both have our own set of experience with dealing with this? You look at it from more of a legal perspective. I look at it more from a practical perspective, and then rely on people like you to go, is this a sound advice based on my initial thought? What are you seeing, and what are your kind of tips for buildings right now? And we're taping this on May 28th, so the city is still essentially shut down.
Yeah.
We're not in anything other than essential construction right now. So what are your tips on visitors and restrictions in buildings?
Yeah, I mean, it's, obviously this has been a kind of developing story. I kind of look at it like a clock, at 0 hour or 12 o'clock, when this whole first thing started to happen, the biggest issues were, we have somebody in the building that has COVID. Do we tell everybody? We have an employee in the building. Do we tell everybody? And of course, our advice has always been, you can't give out first names, but certainly tell people that there is someone in the building tested positive. Be careful. We're going to sanitize and do all that. On the visitor front, of course, initially it was no visitors, no move-ins, nobody coming into the building, and really locking down. As we've developed, we're seeing some lightening of those rules. As you said, in New York City, we're still in a shutdown mode. But what I am starting to see is boards becoming a little bit more lenient, recognizing that, at some point we've got to hopefully get back to some sort of normalcy. So,
Yeah.
In terms of moving in and moving out, when Cuomo came out and said that movers were essential services, many of the buildings that we represent started to again allow move-ins and move-outs. Some didn't, honestly, but many did, and they did so with very specific rules and regulations governing the moving in and moving out. Trying to designate certain days, certain times, limiting the number of move-in and move-outs, trying to devote a specific corridor in the building, whether it be a back entrance in a service elevator or, some area that was roped off for the movers to come in and out. And of course, sanitizing when it's all done and taking care of that way. I'm just going on my computer because I had pulled something up for us to talk about. And of course I got logged out. So I don't mean to be rude by typing so now though, a lot of buildings are saying, okay, we're going to allow, like you said, we got to allow people to get repairmen in to fix the washer and dryer, to fix the appliances, to handle a leak. And how do we do so in a safe way? And, we're putting together rules for buildings to distribute, which provide for just some guidelines so that, they can do that. So for instance, of course, the construction, renovation, decorating, that type of work is still on hold. But if it's essential and it's a repair that's required, and I'm looking up at my screen now, what we've been doing is, requiring that the company that's going to come in, make a repair at least 2 days in advance, not having more than one, depending on the size of the building, 1 or 2 people in the building at the same time. Certainly, upon arriving at the building, of course, wearing a mask and gloves, making sure all the insurance requirements are set, making sure that repair person is the only person in the elevator going up and down, no loitering in the lobby, that type of thing. I guess, and then whatever other building specific issues relate to that person coming in. If there's an elevator operator, that elevator operator may not feel comfortable riding with her, so we got to take that down too. But we've given them rules that kind of this interim period would allow for these types of things. I think then you start to think about, and we're all starting to think about, what are going to be the rules when we quote open up, and what is opening up going to look like.
I have a feeling it's going to be the city saying we're good to go, but it's going to be the building saying, whoa, we need to like slowly slide in and get our footing. We need to make sure that everybody's protected. We need to do this because I can only imagine that everybody, I'm seeing it now. Like I'm getting a lot of, or my staff is as well, getting a lot of, we're looking to do this work in the apartment as soon as the city lifts its restrictions. Here's my application. So if you times that by, even if you times that by 4 in any given building, it's a headache because it's not the headache that's the paperwork is the headache. It's the people coming in. It's the noise. It's, you know, the random companies that you have to account for. It's now we're dealing with this COVID issue. Now you have to perhaps clean and sanitize and make sure that everything is done in a different way. So I think what you're probably getting to is like, what's the proper procedure for opening it up? Even if you're allowed to legally, it doesn't always make the best sense to just throw it, you know, the gates wide open.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, even with my own company, and I'm sure you're seeing with your own company, you know, day one, if things open up on June 15th, with which, frankly, I don't think they will. I mean, I don't mean to be bearish on this. You know, as my kids have been saying, I've been saying all along, of course, when this first started, oh yeah, we'll be back to work on, you know, April 15th, and every week or so that date gets pushed back.
Yeah.
But, and, you know, for my own office, I don't see, you know, if we open up on July 1, it's not like on July 2, I'm going to expect everybody back in the office.
Right. I mean, there's so many variables that we're dealing with in my own office with childcare, with people that have people with underlying health conditions at home, so they don't feel comfortable. And then there's just the people that we're coordinating. We don't have an open bullpen where we are. Everybody has their own office, or there's a few people that share an office. So now we're coordinating to get those people that share an office. How do we get them separated? You know, how do we move them to another office that may be open, or I'm not in the
doing
office.
The same thing.
Yeah. And it's a logistical nightmare, but at the end of the day, I would 1,000 times over rather have a logistical nightmare than one person get sick and then, you know, they experience some sort of sickness, or they bring it home, or they bring it to us. I mean, it's terrible. It's just a new way of thinking. I mean, all the social media companies are basically saying, we're done with the office. If you want to work remote, you could do that. And I don't know how realistic that is in our field, because there are certain people that do need to be there, you know, in the office at certain times, but we're seeing a seismic shift.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people that I've been talking to, especially, I have 3 daughters, 2 of them were in the workforce, and, you know, their friends and many of the companies that they work for are telling their people, look, we're not coming back until January 1, 2021.
Wow.
Maybe we're opening up our office earlier, but if you want to work from home, you go ahead and do so. You know, I think a lot of that depends on the business. And, you know, for me personally, I've always been very bullish on everybody being in the office, and because I think you're much more efficient. I think it enables you to solve problems quicker, but we're going to have to adapt. So for buildings, once we open up, there's going to be a week or two, I think, where they're not going to do anything, and they're going to see how things develop.
Yeah.
And it's going to be slow after that. It's probably good that this is all happening, you know, this hopefully is happening in the summertime, right, when a lot of people, you know, where some people may not be in the buildings, maybe the buildings are a little bit, not as fully occupied, maybe not as many people are doing construction, but you're right. I mean, you're not going to be able to open up and say, okay, you 4 people can all start your construction project.
Yeah.
There's going to have to be some give and take on that. There's going to have to be rules being developed so that everybody gets treated equally. And there are going to have to be new rules developed. You know, every building, whether it's a co-op or a condo, has a set of house rules. And those house rules don't contemplate a pandemic and the after effects of a pandemic. So many buildings are considering now revising their house rules to take into consideration the immediate opening up and the future if this happens again. So we don't get in a situation where, if this does happen again, God forbid, that, you know, we are getting hundreds of calls saying, well, can we have our annual meetings by Zoom, even though our bylaws don't say that we're allowed to do so? So, that's again, another thing that we're doing, I'm sure you're seeing, and is, in the future, at some point, amending the bylaws to allow for this stuff.
Yeah.
I am seeing, and this is actually not something that you and I kind of mentioned before, but it raises in my mind, and you mentioned actually that you were going to some virtual meetings, and some buildings are saying, well, how can we have a virtual annual meeting when our bylaws don't provide for it? And frankly, my advice has been, look, this is a very unique situation. And even though it doesn't specifically say you can have a virtual meeting, and might even say specifically you're supposed to attend, in person or in proxy,
Right.
I think the choice between, not having anything at all or having the virtual meeting, and I think it's very, very acceptable to go ahead and have that meeting virtually. And, the intent is to have this, to go ahead and do it. And by having the virtual meeting, you're really following through on the intent of the bylaws.
I think in 2019, there was a New York State law that came out that allowed businesses to hold electronic annual meetings, right? By default.
Yeah.
So long as you could verify that the person who is attending is the person that was intended. There was some language, and I forget what it was, but I feel like the New York Business Law Corporation.
Well, the BCL definitely was amended to allow that for director meetings.
Right.
Whether it was for owner meetings, I do not think so, but I could be mistaken. We'll have to follow another podcast.
Yeah, that'll be I thought that it rang the bell, it rang a bell. Yeah, so I have done, I'm doing every day, we're doing board meetings virtually. That's a given.
Yeah.
Minutes are taken, minutes are approved at the next board meeting. So, it's business as usual with that. But the big swing for us has been the annual meetings on Zoom, which is what we're taping this on now. And I did my first one for a building last week or the week before, and it was actually pretty easy. We had everybody change their name on their on the Zoom display to have either their apartment number or their name, so that we could check off attendance. Even the phone numbers that we had, I was running it as the host, so I have the capability to rename everybody and mute everybody and do all that. So I was renaming people that I saw and I could, recognize, so that the board could do that. And then they did the whole, they didn't do the voting on the Zoom. They sent out all of the ballots, and they gave everybody until such and such time to, send in the ballots. And, that's, I think, the workaround. But I'm very interested to see if this is the new future, because I can't see a world in the next year at all until there's a vaccine and everybody's had it. I can't imagine where people are going to want to put themselves in a situation where they're going to possibly get sick because they wanted to get together with their neighbors and have an annual meeting to vote on. It's the risk reward scenario. And I don't know if this is that. Like, I can understand I need to go to this funeral, or I need to go to this family event that's really important. But to go to a board meeting or an annual meeting or to hear the accountant talk, these are all things that we could do here. We could even prepackage them and record them on the computer and send that out. It doesn't even have to be live unless there's a voting component to it.
Yeah, no, I agree. Cramming into a basement is not something I see in the very near future.
Yeah.
I think the hardest part about it is, and as well as I, that if you go to annual meetings on a regular basis, and certainly we've been doing it, both of us, for many years, the number one complaint that you hear at every annual meetings is that the board is not communicating well enough with the shareholders or unit owners. And having the virtual meetings, especially in large buildings, it's very difficult to allow for questions and do all that. So I think that is something that is going to have to be dealt with, whether it means people should be submitting their questions ahead of time and answered that way. People should be, I guess, if we do the virtual meetings and the attendance is not that large, you could have questions going on during the meeting. but it
Right.
becomes very difficult to manage.
Yeah. Somebody's got to be like how I was doing on that
Right.
meeting. Somebody's got to be the host in terms of parsing all this data and then passing that off to the board who's running the meeting, perhaps. Voting could work. I think we're going to do voting online. And the way that we're going to do it is we're going to create a Google form, and it's going to be pre-set up. So you put in your name, you put in your apartment, your email address, the people that you're voting for, but we're going to randomly generate codes, send those beforehand out to each shareholder. And then you have to, as the shareholder who has your unique code, have to put in your code. And if they match, then we're going to match up that vote to that shareholder, and it'll be, a valid vote.
Right. That's
So,
a process I've seen, working. I think also the candidacy process will change somewhat, maybe get better, actually, to tell you the truth. I mean, if many buildings, of course, will solicit interest from owners, whether they want to run up for the board or not. We'll put a deadline for that submission, and then have some sort of candidate Zoom call where each candidate gets to present, and then have the voting like you described afterwards. I think if this continues, the concept of nominating people from the floor on the day of this Zoom meeting will be very difficult to do.
Yeah. And, I said something about recording before, but that would be a perfect scenario for recording. You just get all the candidates together, do a quick Zoom, 3 minutes on why I want to run for the board, package it, send it out as a link to everybody to view, and you're done with it. There's no questions and answers from the floor. It's just, here's who I am. Here's why I'm interested in running for the board. Please vote for me.
And people could watch it at their leisure, of course.
Yeah.
And, hey, listen, the possibility of these types of meetings, changes things a little bit, I would think, for you as well. I mean, managers maybe don't have to be at meetings all through the night. And, maybe there's a way to do it where, that's always been in my experience, both for lawyers and for managers, having to spend so many nights at these meetings. If you're going to do things virtually, maybe it becomes easier to do them at more convenient times.
Not that I recommend it at all, and I'm not asking for more of them, but if I'm like now, because we're all in this home confinement situation, and somebody says, hey, can we get on a quick Zoom at 1:00 on a Sunday? I'm not doing anything else. Okay, fine. Yeah. Let's get half hour here, and it's done, instead of a 3-hour trip to go to the building and sit in the meeting and then go back home. And of course, I even played with the prospect in the future of saying, with this whole digital world, maybe we have one price if you want to do Zoom meetings, and then it's a 20% upgrade, if you want to do in person. And maybe there's a leverage button that we could hit where it's just, okay, we can save you money and we could all work a little bit more efficiently. We don't need to be in the same room. Maybe that will work, because every time, just like when you're out there, when you're traveling, that's not really the best use of your time. So I would be willing
to
take a haircut and to maybe use that to go into, maybe new clients, or doing the extra work that I needed to for this client that now I can't do because I'm stuck, on the BQA, or I'm on the 6 train. Not anymore, but I don't think I'm going on the 6 train for a very long time. But these are the things that we have to play with. And these are half business, half real estate,
And, not all negative too. I mean, let's, obviously, I think, what I've been trying to keep and stay positive with all the people that work for us is, yes, this has been very difficult, but, let's try to take some positives from this, and maybe some things will change for the positive. And once we get the vaccine, some of these positive things will stay with us. I had sent out a question to all the people that work in our office, what things that we're doing during COVID are going to remain with us forever. And, every time you go, and as you go through the day and you think about that question, you come across so many things like that, may not have occurred to you before, but that will occur to you as you're doing them. And it's interesting. And
it's a learning experience.
It is.
That's for sure. And it's one I'll never forget. My kids, your kids, they'll never forget. It's as big as 9/11 when I was 20, or it was 2000, so I was 23. that's one of those every generation moments that just sears in your mind forever. And you know exactly what you were doing, where you were, who you were with. But this is just the long, slow burn of it, you know?
Yeah. I mean, this has been a lot different. I think, obviously, 9/11 was horrific and terrible. But, after a month or so, we were back in our office. And
Right.
It wasn't business as usual. Our lives change. But the day-to-day didn't change. This, I think, has obviously, we've been at it for now 3 months, and it's going to have everlasting changes going forward. Some good, some bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's all changed. So how can people get in touch with you directly?
Email's always the best. jschwartz@ssrga.com. You can always call me on my cell phone. I'm happy to give it out now, 914-450-6280. Again, thanks for having me. This was great. I enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, same. So let me tell everybody before they go off again, it's nycrealestatepodcast@gmail.com, nycrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. And Jeff, I'm going to put all of your contact info also in the description of the podcast and the videos, so people will be able to get in touch with you directly through there, just probably by pressing the link for the email address. But it was great having you. I'm sure that you'll be back, and we'll talk about other stuff, hopefully non-COVID related.
Love to.
All right. Take